So I want to make a quick video about the recent post that I made on YouTube when I kind of calculated how tall of a stack of $100 bills would be $1 trillion and how much we printed in the United States and how crazy that number is. But then there are a couple of comments on there which would suggest that modern monetary theory doesn't care about it because all we care about is the rate of debt to GDP, which is completely false because the GDP can grow. That doesn't necessarily make you wealthy, right? The poor people, can live in poverty indefinitely and the GDP could be growing, the debt could be growing. So just because the GDP is growing, that doesn't mean that we have equality of wealth distribution. Now, I'm not for forced wealth distribution, but I would like to live in a fairer system. And that's really hard to do when you're constantly issuing fresh currency, right? Because the people who get to spend that fresh currency early into the economy get the benefit of that. And while you don't necessarily get anything from that if you're actually working for money. So, um, a commenter, and I like comments, so thank you for your comments. Don't worry about that. But I want to answer you, right? And I did my best to answer in text, but I also want to make a video, so hopefully more of you can listen to it, right? So the commenter says that it's not really correct because 98% of the currency is created by the commercial banks, which is roughly true. No one knows how much currency there is in the world. That's probably true as well. So 1 trillion in this lot in the overall currency in the world, in the euro dollar system, right, by Jeff Snyder, said by Jeff Snyder, if you know who he is, that it doesn't really matter, right, how much is base money is printed, which I disagree with. And the second comment he has, that 30 trillion of debt does not have anything, not say anything really, because it's just a number, and what we care about is the debt to GDP ratio that matters. Well, I disagree on both of them, right? So why? Because what we do is, and what economists do and YouTubers do and whoever wants to convince you of something, then they just make a big enough mental picture where you can't comprehend it, and they pull out some numbers what you should focus on, and if that makes sense, the whole thing makes sense, right? But what you can do in these types of situations is simplify it better and better, make a smaller model where you can actually comprehend it. And I gave him an example. Of course, these are not perfect, but I just want you to understand what's really happening. So, yeah, if you make a big enough mental picture, people can't comprehend it, right? But if you think about just a small town, and you have $10,000 in savings, but all your neighbors have $2,000 in savings. Great, you're a rich man in that small town, right? And a used car, let's say that's 4K, so that's $4,000. That means you could buy two used cars and still have money left over, where your neighbors not really, right? They would have to save up for that car, right? But the Fed prints and hands out $6,000 for everyone, right? Now you have $16,000, but all your neighbors have $8,000, right? So you went from having 5 times more money than your neighbors to only having 2 times more money than your neighbors. Now you might be happy, right, because of that. However, that means that your wealth just got stolen. Maybe if you save that money all your life, then now you're that much poorer. Why? Because now there's more competition in the city or in the town to buy those exact same used cars, right? Now everyone can afford the same used cars. So they go ahead and start buying it. That means there's less for you. And of course, because of supply and demand, cars weren't printed, money was printed. Now the same cars sell for a much higher price. So the price of that will roughly equal out around $8,000, whatever money everyone had in savings, plus 2,000, right? So who really benefited? You, who had $10,000 in savings, you lost because now you can afford less stuff, right? You thought you were okay, but now you're not really with that savings. You have to go back to work again. Everyone else sort of kind of benefited, but not really. The only people who benefited was the people who bought cars immediately as that fresh currency was issued out, right? Everyone else didn't really benefit because the cost of the stuff went up quite soon after, right? So they are back to square one. But if you think about it, someone really benefited. Who was that? Well, it was the used car salesman. That is who got all the new cash, right? And the higher prices. So that is why with money printing, the rich get richer because they own assets, right? They own the stuff that they sell to you, right? And it will end up in their hand anyway if you don't have assets. So that is why during these money printing frenzy, who benefited? Then you're going crazy. Hey, how come Jeff Bezos and all the rest of the people doubled and tripled their money, and the rest of the poor people are just barely getting by? Well, that is why, right? And of course, this is simple. Economies are much more complex, but it can give you an idea what's really happening. And regarding M1, M2, and M3 money, Jeff Snider is correct on it, right? That just because base money is being printed, the commercial banks actually issue most of the money. However, everything is derived off of base money, and yes, we can get away with printing money if the rest of the money supply is actually shrinking. So we have the exact same currency in circulation as before. But for that to happen, well, how does money get destroyed? The only way, because money is debt, if you don't know, then watch more Mike Maloney. But really, what happens is debt has to be paid off. So as long as debt is being paid off with that money, you can get away with printing more, right? And regarding the euro dollar system, well, what happens, right? You can also get away with printing money if the rest of the printing currency, if the rest of the currency is also being sucked up and being tucked away in savings accounts around the world. And my personal belief is that is what's been happening, and that is why we never got into hyperinflation, because all of this dollars getting sucked up, right? Getting sucked up by Lebanon, by Turkey, and all of the other edges of the empire that need to hedge against their own currency, because that is going to be worthless or is going down in value, right? So as long as they are sucking up this excess currency, then we can get away with printing money down at the center of the empire, and that is what has been happening, right? So for the second comment about $30 trillion in debt does not say anything. It's a debt to GDP ratio that matters. Not so. Everything matters. Absolutely everything matters. Because as I said early on, just because the GDP is growing, that doesn't mean that you personally are getting rich, right? You might be actually, if you're a saver of currency, you might be losing purchasing power, while someone who had credit, right? The big banks, the big corporations who operate with leverage and operate with credit, they are getting a better deal. So let me give you an example, right? It's similar to the car example. So let's say, so absolutely it counts, right? But let's say you're saving cash, and everyone in the world, and the world only creates widgets, and we only consume widgets, a fictionary product, right? So if you have a fixed income of $1,000 a month, Social Security or something like that, it absolutely counts, because let's say a widget costs $100, and everyone's salary is $1,000, so you can buy 10 widgets a month, and that's it. Everything goes as is the way before. However, if money gets printed and it gets kind of much liquid, right? Much liquidity is printed out in the market, then the cost of widget goes up $200. As long as the cost of your wage goes up to $2,000, you can still buy 10 widgets, right? What he's saying is that the debt to GDP ratio is pretty much the same, and everyone is happy. However, if you were the person who had the $1,000 a month social security money or the fixed income, now you can only buy half of half of the amount of widget what you could buy earlier, right? If you had money saved up. However, the economy doesn't work that fast, right? There's a production line, there's a huge mechanism behind everything. So usually what goes, and goes back to the theory, the waves theory that I was presenting a while back ago, what we learned from Romania, right, my family, that actually there's a wave of how things go up in prices, and then it repeats, and then there's another wave, and then it repeats, right? So actually the widget cost goes up first, right, because that is what you want to consume, and eventually salaries will catch up. But let's say there's a 6-month delay between the widget cost going up and everyone's salary going up. So the widget goes up $200, but your salary is still $1,000. And slowly it will creep up to $200 or $2,000. So the GDP is the same, but who knows? Maybe inflation is not transitory, and then by that time widget costs go up again. So if there's a 6-month delay, you're actually poor for 6 months, and then you catch up, right? But then by that time, if the widget cost went up, you are poor again for 6 months, and this could go on for 7 years, 5 years, you know. So what has happened that way, in this way? Well, your living standards have to go down from being able to afford 10 widgets to 5 digits, from 10 widgets to 5 widgets, right? So it's actually a financial repression that's going on. Well, why is that going on? Because that is how the issuer of the currency is actually taking away your productivity, which is the same. You're still producing the same widgets, but your productivity is being stolen away because of what they want to fund with newly printed currency. So that is how they fund big projects, right? That is how they fund anything in government with debt, basically. So then what happens is also a worse part of that, because as soon as people catch up to this game, what actually happens is that people scramble to spend money as fast as possible because they know that widget will cost more in 6 months. After the second, third cycle, they will know that another one will come. So they start up, because there's not only widgets in the world, right? They start buying up stuff that they think they need, right? So there's now a bad signal in the market. Instead of the market dictating what we want for you to produce, we just buy up everything that goes up in price, right? So now there's a misallocation of wealth, and there's a misallocation of currency, but also a misallocation of market signals that get messed with it, right? So that way whole markets break down, shortages appear, and it just becomes total chaos, right? So basically I'm telling that modern monetary theory, which is, well, nothing really counts as long as the ratios stay the same, is completely bullcrap. It's not a monetary theory. Not a monetary theory at all. It is actually a people control theory. That's what it is, right? Because what it specializes in is issuing currency and taking back currency by taxes in a very dynamic way, where you get to control very individual sectors of the economy. It's a control theory. It's not a money theory. So be aware of that. Anyway, thank you, and follow the channel.